Many would dream of living in Ireland, but something is brewing underneath the surface.
Both of my sisters are emigrated, so I'm emigrating as well.
I don't really see a future for me living in Ireland.
Young people struggle to find a job. Wages are poor, the cost of living high. They can often find better opportunities abroad, and so they leave.
We are still breeding our young people like our cattle for export.
Ireland spends millions on educating its workforce, and those young people then make careers abroad. That's how it's always been. There are 15 times more Irish people abroad than in Ireland. They have had negative net migration for decades. In recent years, the number of people coming to Ireland is skewing these figures. But in reality, over 80,000 people left in 2015 alone. But most people fail to see how this wave of immigrants and Ireland's massive diaspora is actually the solution to their problems. This is how Ireland is wasting its greatest resource with hindsight. There are, of course, many real challenges that young people face, and if many of them move abroad, that inevitably puts considerable strain on the country. For example, 81% of Irish companies now struggle to find workers. This is much worse than just a few years ago. But I disagree with the common narrative of the media calling it a ticking time bomb or a worrying brain drain. This completely misses historical perspective. I will get into why Irish youth are so eager to move abroad, and more importantly, why the massive Irish diaspora could be key to solving these issues. But first, it's important to recognize Ireland's historic trend with immigration. The 1840s were a dark time for Ireland. There was a major shortage of food, and tens of thousands of people were dying of hunger. It was particularly bad in the western and southern parts of the island, and this hardship forced over 1 million people to leave the country over the course of just a few years. Most immigrants were farmers, unemployed or unskilled, and the majority left for the United States. By 1871, Ireland's population stood at just 4 million people. In subsequent years, the population continued to shrink, and every year, tens of thousands of Irish people left to search for better fortune abroad. Ireland had a relatively backward economy that relied mostly on agriculture. Its only real export were its people. Even in the 1950s, when many countries in the West experienced rapid economic growth, Ireland's economy grew by just 8%, compared to the European average of about 40%. This stark difference inspired many people during the 1950s to leave the country and to be part of the rapid economic development that most other countries were seeing. Ireland lost 500,000 people, which means that 1 in every 6 citizens left the country. The large number of people abroad, combined with improved communications infrastructure, started a new phenomenon. Irish people abroad started sending money to their families in Ireland. In some regions, like the Western Seaboard, remittances accounted for over 10% of the entire economy. Irish expats were now becoming increasingly important to Ireland, but its government invested barely anything in cultivating a relationship with its diaspora. After the economic disaster of the 1950s, for the first time, people were moving back in the 1970s, but in the 1980s, disaster struck again. Many young people were struggling to find jobs. They left the country again in large numbers. But things were about to turn around. The Ireland we know today is the product of a period of rapid economic growth that became known as the Celtic Tiger period. Job opportunities in Ireland became on par with those of other countries, and fewer Irishmen left and more were coming back. The global financial crisis turned this around, but later it bounced back again. This is the historical trend. When times are bad, people leave, and when times are good, people come back. After decades of emigration, the Irish diaspora has grown huge. This gave Ireland global connections far beyond its size, helping Ireland establish itself as the gateway to doing business in Europe. But now, times are bad.
I'm not looking for anything special. All I wanted was a 1 or 2 bed apartment, but has been mentioned here behind me as well, the prices of them. It's just extortionate.
People aren't saving to buy houses now. They're saving to get out of the country.
Before we get to what's happening today and the diaspora's potential role in solving it, a quick word from my sponsor. Our personal information is perhaps the most valuable information that we possess, but there exists an entire industry out there of companies who are collecting this data and who are selling it behind our backs. This is a major reason why we receive so much junk mail and robot calls, and this leaves you vulnerable to identity theft. Luckily, you have the right to privacy, and there exist laws that oblige data brokers to delete your information if you make that request. But the problem is that by now your information is probably on hundreds of lists. Incogni, the sponsor of today's video, has automated this process for you. They reach out to data brokers on your behalf and make requests for your data to be deleted. I signed up 3 months ago, and my information has already been deleted from 91 lists, and 9 are currently in progress. In the last few days alone, they took me off all these lists. If you want to restore your privacy, Incogni is offering a 60% discount on an annual plan if you use my link that I put in the description and in the pinned comment. That is 60% off a yearly plan. Now, let's go back to the video. The Irish think very lightly about leaving the country. Emigration is part of its national identity, but something changed in the last decades.
Only 2 years ago, multinational companies were queuing up to hire university graduates like these. Now, the situation has changed drastically.
It really is heartbreaking. I mean, it is terrible to think that in this day and age we are once again raising our children for export.
The Celtic Tiger period that gave rise to Ireland as a modern economic powerhouse was followed by a collapse and a recession. And young people were hit disproportionately hard.
Nowhere is this brain drain more obvious than at Ireland's largest technology college, and most students here are planning to emigrate.
Young, gifted, and gone. Ireland spent decades on building its educational system, but the job market had imploded.
Queuing to leave the country. Thousands of people turned up at an international jobs fair in Cork today, hoping to escape unemployment at home and to make new lives abroad.
When times were good, this country was fantastic. There was great money to be made and great opportunities and all the rest of it, but just like a train crash, it just stopped.
Young people were hit particularly hard by the recession and then by the effects of the pandemic.
Young adults are really facing a perfect storm. They're in a labour market which hadn't recovered from the financial crisis, and then the pandemic has come on top of that.
It is no longer primarily unskilled or unemployed workers that are moving away. Today, it are highly educated and trained young people. And this instilled fears of what the media called a brain drain. But let's not yet reach that conclusion.
But the age group involved, let's be honest about it, a significant proportion of them always went abroad, particularly after college, after finishing their first job.
We no longer live in the 1840s. It's easy to travel back and forth between mainland Europe and Ireland, or even from Canada and Australia. That puts millions of immigrants who recently moved away, or during waves in the 2010s, 1980s or 1950s, much more within reach. Particularly this recent wave of young people who left. Most of them went to countries outside the EU, and they have short-term visas. It's very likely that they are at least considering returning. So, what is the Irish government doing to cultivate a relationship with its expats? Many Irish still carry a strong sense of pride in their heritage. It's difficult to wrap your head around the sheer size of the Irish diaspora. 11% of US citizens, 14% of Canadians, and 30% of Australians have Irish roots. There are more Irish people in Australia than in all of Ireland. This culture is still alive. It is visible, and Ireland can take advantage of it. Today, 1 in 10 people between ages 18 and 34 are planning to move abroad, while 1 in 3 is considering it. The most cited reason for moving away is the cost of living.
They can no longer afford the rent here in Dublin. They've had to move in with their siblings. They're living on couches.
In my first year of college, I was homeless. I was going between houses trying to find a place to sleep, and then for the last 3 years I've been squatting.
Many students look for housing outside the city, sometimes having to commute several hours to take a class. But in recent years, rural areas are seeing the fastest rent price increases as more people are looking for affordable accommodation.
There's a dire crisis in education, not only for the children who are homeless and who are having difficulties with housing, but especially for our young members who are leaving this country in thousands.
There's a sense of pessimism about the future. This is primarily fueled by perceptions that the economy is performing poorly and that the government isn't handling the situation. 1 in 3 young people say that they rarely or never feel optimistic about the future. 1 in 2 say that they have low levels of mental well-being. 1 in 5 says that they occasionally skip meals due to high costs. Immigrants who left the country during the wave in the 2010s rated their quality of life a 5.5 out of 10. A few years after moving away, they rated their lives abroad a 7.9 out of 10. A starting point would be to provide better support for the Irish youth at home. But the Irish government also does shockingly little to engage with its diaspora, especially if you compare it to other countries. In the Western Balkans, the government encourages its foreign nationals to invest and to start businesses in their countries of origin. They aim to leverage their diaspora for economic development at home. In Poland, Lithuania, and Hungary, the focus lies primarily on providing education to its diaspora community to maintain cultural ties with their homeland. In France, Portugal, Romania, and Italy, there are special seats in parliament to give its diaspora a say in domestic affairs. In fact, only Ireland and Malta don't allow their diaspora to vote during elections. The moment an Irish citizen leaves the country, they lose the right to vote. While most Irish citizens are of the opinion that they should temporarily or indefinitely maintain the right to vote, giving expats a vote in domestic affairs helps nurture a connection between them and the country. And despite regular calls to change this electoral system, it still hasn't happened. Emigration can actually alleviate some pressure on Ireland. If people are moving away, fewer people are competing for the same job. But Ireland also has massive talent shortages. They could potentially tap into their enormous diaspora community to target those people with these specific skills to come back home. This is what Romania did in 2022. They experienced significant numbers of people leaving their country, resulting in massive talent shortages. But they attracted tens of thousands of them to come back home and develop Romania's high-tech sectors. Portugal offered tax breaks of up to 100% on their personal income tax to target specific groups of people to stay in the country and to help alleviate talent shortages. But the solution always starts at home.
I've actually been away since 2019 working overseas, and I was really optimistic because my end goal was to come home, get a beautiful home in Dublin. However, I had to come back 4 years later. I have to sleep in a couch in my mom's house.
People aren't saving to buy houses now. They're saving to get out of the country.
What am I doing, and should I just move to Australia?
We know that the main reasons to leave the country is the economy, the government's handling of the situation, and the job market. Improve these conditions and people will come back.
But I think we're not doing enough to incentivize our young people to stay here. We literally go abroad looking for nurses, looking for IT professionals, but we're not incentivizing our young people. We don't even value them as the asset that they are.
And if Ireland can create the right conditions at home, they hold the key to unlocking the potential of some of the largest and most influential diaspora communities in the world.